that would be much appreciated. Someone was asleep at the wheel. May 29th. Thank you. John, you might want to go on mute right up until the time that you go to speak.
Okay.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kernahan Webb. I am a professor in the Department of Law and Business at the Toronto Metropolitan University, and more directly relevant here, I'm the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility. And it is my pleasure to be participating in a group discussion session with two excellent colleagues of mine that are toiling more or less the same fields as I am toiling, and that is the whole area of rule of law and the international rule-based order. And those would be my colleagues Errol Mendes and John Sherman. More about them momentarily. I will just say to those of you who are patching in for the first time to one of these sessions, welcome. And to those of you who are a return participant, welcome back. Just to mention that all of these sessions are done in the spirit of constructive engagement, in particular focusing on the role of business, but more broadly, as the case might be. And this is one of those situations where it is as the case might be. Next slide, please. Toronto Metropolitan University is located in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Next slide, please. All of the sessions of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility Zoom sessions are animated by this definition of social responsibility, which comes from the ISO 26000 standard, which is a standard that brought together governments, private sector, civil society, organizations, intergovernmental bodies to develop a consensus world standard on social responsibility. And that extracting from that more than 100-page standard is this particular definition of social responsibility. Responsibility of an organization for the impacts of its decisions and activities on society and the environment through transparent and ethical behavior, contributing to sustainable development, taking into account the expectations of stakeholders, not just shareholders, expectations of stakeholders, is in compliance with applicable law, but also consistent with international norms of behavior, not just integrated in the organization, but also practiced in its relationships with communities, workers, consumers, supply chains, and so on. Next slide, please. The second concept that animates all of the work that we do here at the CSR Institute is the concept of sustainable governance, which starts from the proposition that in the 21st century, where we're dealing with very fast-moving, complex, multi-jurisdictional, environmental, social, and economic challenges, really the only chance we have of effectively addressing them is by harnessing the unique energies and capabilities of all three, of government, the private sector, and civil society, using a combination of rule instruments, processes, institutions, and actors. And sometimes that's all about collaboration, and sometimes it involves a bit of a more of a rivalrous check and balance dynamic, and both are arguably valuable. Next slide, please. There are many other CSR Institute sessions in the past and coming up. All of them are accessible from the TMU University CSR Institute webpage, and I would encourage you to go there to find out about past events and access them, but also to find out about future ones. Toronto Metropolitan University does a lot of work in the area. You can see that's just some examples of the work that we do. Next slide, please. So we happen to have, in addition to myself, we happen to have two superb speakers coming at things from their unique perspectives. First being Errol Mendez, who is a professor at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law, and as well, he's the president of the International Commission of Jurists Canada section. He'll be speaking specifically about work in the area of rule of law that that organization has been doing. Errol has also served as a commissioner on the Ontario Human Rights Commission and has served as an advisor to government, civil society organizations, the UN, Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, published extensively on a wide diversity of topics, and has been appropriately the recipient of a number of different awards. Next slide, please. John Sherman III is a leading authority on business and human rights, particularly on its implications for legal practice, given his background. More on that momentarily. But he joined the late Professor John Ruggie's core UN mandate in 2008 after a long career as Deputy General Counsel for the multinational corporation National Grid. He was Professor Ruggie's senior legal advisor, helping him draft and shape the UN Guiding Principles, and then post the UN Guiding Principles, helping Professor Ruggie in launching SHIFT, the organization that really has been performing this very significant role in, as they say in academia, mobilization of the UN Guiding Principles and further elaboration and thinking about it. And he continues to be a valuable voice standing up for these issues, working with a diversity of different interests, and also making excellent comments on LinkedIn, I might add. So next slide, please. With respect to myself, I'm here at Toronto Metropolitan University and done basically the bulk of my research on innovative approaches to regulation. I've been employed by government and also worked as a consultant for government and intergovernmental organizations and the private sector and civil society, and have been heavily involved in the development of a number of different national and international standards and laws, as the case might be. The next slide, please. So we are very fortunate to have participating here today, patching in from around the world, people. And I just want to indicate that if you do have a question or comment, please email me, and I will do my best to fold in your questions and comments into the conversation. So thank you very much. So if we can now go oh, that's all right. I can handle it that way as well. Hold on a second, and I'll put the slides up here.
Sorry about that, Gertie. I jumped the gun. Here's the next slide.
Oh, okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to set the stage about what we're talking about here today. And then I'm going to be passing things over to Errol. And then we'll pass things over to John. And then we will, as they say in French, we will have a bit of a bavardage. We'll have a discussion among all of us here. So basic thing is that I think many would agree we're having what is called a polycrisis at both the domestic and at the global level, and some would say we're at this inflection point or turning point, and in particular, it's the actions of the Trump administration that are undermining basic understandings of the rule of law and the international rule-based order. It's somewhat ironic that this is coming from the United States, because it's the United States itself that's played the lead role over the past 80 years in shaping understandings of the rule of law and the international rule-based order. So for the United States of all parties to be leading the parade in eroding from that is somewhat ironic and unfortunate. But what we're seeing is that the institutional checks and balances at both the domestic and at the international level, so courts, rulemaking bodies, and so on, they seem to be breaking down in the face of what I'm calling a flood the zone barrage of seemingly rule of law and international rule-based violative actions by the Trump administration. And the basic message that is being explored here is whether or not coordinated action by concerned actors at both the domestic and the global level stands the best chance of preserving the integrity of the rule of law and the international rule-based order. Next slide, please. So what I'm suggesting is that if there is any traction with this idea of a global multi-sectoral coalition in support of the rule of law, it's going to require arms that oftentimes in the past have not stretched across aisles to do exactly that, to stretch across aisles. And I have a quote here, and we'll talk more about this organization later. But this is an organization that has issued a statement in support of the rule of law. And I just found that to be a very well said point here. We do not agree on all matters. And in fact, at times have been or are adverse to each other in court or other professional settings. But despite our differences, we all share a common commitment to the rule of law. And I think it's with that kind of a spirit that I think animates the exploration that we're having here today, and hopefully beyond this, it perhaps will gain traction and be more than just an exploration. Next slide, please. So I'm legally trained. That's either a basic major fault that I have, or you could call it an advantage. But one way or the other, definitions are very, very important to to legally trained people. And so coalitions, since we're talking about coalitions, what exactly is a coalition? And you can see here, I've just put together some thoughts. These are just working thoughts for now. Structured or semi-structured alliance of diverse actors voluntarily uniting around a shared goal. And as you can see here, the key features of a global coalition: they share a common purpose, they're a voluntary association, they have diversity, they have some type of coordination, and at the same time, they maintain a great deal of autonomy. So these are the basic ideas that underlie the concept of coalition. Next slide, please. So interestingly enough, we've done some preliminary research, and that preliminary research, by the way, is up on that website that you see listed there, resilientgovernance.org website. I would like to thank two researchers here at Toronto Metropolitan University, Fetros and Zacher, for their excellent research assistance on this. But so far, we've found more than 5,500 organizations that have publicly expressed on websites and otherwise their support for the rule of law and condemned erosions for the rule of law. And you can find who those organizations are by going to that Resilient Governance website that is mentioned above. So they're largely law-based organizations, and that makes complete sense. I'm suggesting that what we need is a multi-sectoral coalition. That is to say, move beyond those who have kind of law in their title or in their day-to-day jobs, for example, lawyers, and encompass a diversity of other organizations that have come to realize the centrality of the rule of law to everything that they do. And those would be business organizations, civil society organizations, and so on. Again, just based upon this preliminary research, there have been a lot of United States organizations, and you might have expected that. But in addition, you can see, as you see here, from a diversity of other countries around the world. And really, we've only just begun that research. We've really just started to do this research on effectively Monday of this week. So this is very preliminary kind of casting out of the net to see what's out there. And also some very important international organizations have also provided statements of support for the rule of law, including the ICJC, and Errol is the head of that, and he'll be speaking to that. So the work that we've done through resilientgovernance.org website that you can see is very preliminary, and we're anticipating many more signees that we will find and or will email us to indicate that they also have done this sort of thing. But your suggestions and additions are welcome. Next slide, please. So this is just a working definition of the rule of law. This would be the subject of discussion should a coalition emerge from this. But the basic idea, a rule of law is a socio-political legal concept articulating the idea that all societal organs are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated and implemented pursuant to an agreed upon, fair, and transparent process, that the laws are equally enforced, the laws are independently adjudicated, so this gets into the concept of due process, and are consistent with internationally agreed upon international rule-based order. And you can see their key characteristics: equality, predictability, access to justice, impartiality of the courts, and checks and balances with respect to government power. And you can see that there's both domestic and global sort of dimensions to this. Next slide, please. The same could be said in terms of it's valuable to come up with a working definition of international rule-based order. Again, the actual definition of rule-based order that a coalition might come up with could be considerably different, but this is just to give us all here today a quick idea. We're talking about an international framework which states and other actors are expected to conduct their affairs in order to preserve global stability, cooperation, and peace. Includes legal agreements, but it's also informed by principles such as respect for sovereignty, duty to uphold agreements, voluntary entered into, and so on. And it involves institutions and processes such as those of the UN, WTO, ICJ, ICC, NATO, etc. Excuse me for just using an alphabet set of acronyms for now, but if any of you are not familiar with any of those, please feel free to email me and I will clarify that later. Next slide, please. So the basic forward plan that I'm proposing for discussion here by my colleagues and myself, Errol and John, is that we work away on an inventory of organizations around the world that are expressing a commitment to the rule of law and international rule-based order. We'll do some analysis of that, like, for example, where are they from? What exactly do their particular statements say? And I say that because depending upon what your organization is, you might be particularly interested in one particular dimension of erosion of the rule of law or the international rule-based order. You might be concerned about the actions of the United States with respect to condemning the International Chamber, the International Criminal Court, or its withdrawing from international treaties and other obligations. Or you might be concerned about the various different threats and actions done by the Trump administration within the United States, and you're particularly concerned about those because you are a university, or because you are a law firm, or because you are a lawyer, or because you are an immigrant or a person who's been picked up off the street and have been put in a jail somewhere and are having difficulty even reaching a lawyer, let alone getting out of jail. So depending upon where you come from, you will have potentially a different pinch point with respect to these intrusions on and erosions of the rule of law and international rule-based order. But the idea of the basic forward plan is that we would draft a basic common statement that hopefully we can all agree on. And we can all agree on it because we all agree that essentially the rule of law is a load-bearing plank, or a load-bearing beam. That's the expression that I've kind of fallen into using to describe how significant the rule of law and the international rule-based order is to everything that we do, whether we are in business, government, civil society, or just individuals. Another aspect of the forward plan would be to take a temperature of the appetite for a more coordination of these disparate actors. And as I indicated with that quote at the beginning, I think we really need to do that because right now we're in a situation where one actor is very focused and very coordinated, and that is the Trump administration, and they are just basically um, flooding the zone with their erosions one way or the other, and they're overwhelming a lot of individuals and a lot of organizations, and taking advantage of this moment of overwhelming. And my suggestion is that a more coordinated approach is likely to be more effective in preserving the integrity of the rule-based international rule-based order and rule of law. A basic forward plan would also involve identifying possible multi-sector, so not just law-based, but also non-law-based, not just U.S., but also non-U.S. based actors to lead the development and implementation of the coalition. So there are a number of international organizations that have stood up, and they are kind of logical leaders at the international level. But I would like to see some others that are not so law focused also standing up, be they organizations such as Amnesty International or Greenpeace or these sorts of ones, Transparency International, that the rule of law is essential, integral to everything that they do, but it's not in their title the way it is with the International Bar Association or the international jurists, that sort of thing. So I do think that a multi-sector coalition would be much more effective, and that's going to require that organizations stand up to take leadership roles, both at the international level and within individual countries, and self-evidently within the United States. And if there is that sort of coalition, it would be harder, I would suggest, for individuals and individual organizations to be picked off, which is what's going on now. So, and then the final thing would be to be exploring exactly what this coalition could do and exactly how this coalition could do that. So that's basically me attempting to set the table. I'm just going to one more slide, and this should not in any way be held against me or anyone else, but this is just on my own. So please don't shoot anyone else. But this is just like a first cut idea of what a basic rule of law, international rule-based order statement might look like that could be adopted and agreed to by individuals, organizations across the political spectrum, across the ideological spectrum, across no matter what type of particular activity they do on a day-to-day basis. Just all agreeing on this load-bearing beam that underlies everything that we do. And then from there, we can have much opportunity for diversity. We can focus on human rights. We can focus on the environment. We can focus on consumers. We can focus on workers. We can focus on communities. But we all have this in common. That's the idea here. So something like this. But remember, the idea of me putting this out here is just to give you an idea of what a basic statement could look like. But as yet, this hasn't been agreed to by anyone. So that's it, Luke. If you can stop sharing the slides there, and we can then turn things over. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from my good colleague Errol. So Errol, thanks very much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Kunhan, and great work so far on what you've done. Thanks very much for organizing this, and thank you to everyone who's actually registered for this event. I've heard that there's sufficient numbers who can be the beginnings of a coalition, so thank you very much. So the organization which I lead, the International Commission of Jurists Canada, decided to put up a national statement on social media and on its own internet on the backsliding of democracy in the United States, which essentially affects not only the rule of law in the United States, but has an effect globally. In fact, if you want any example of that, the decision yesterday of the International Trade Court, which actually now puts in question the legality of many of the tariffs that the president has put in. But I think what's important is for all of us who are interested in the rule of law is to think about what is it about the backsliding of democracy and the rule of law is at its core, and how can we basically develop coalitions or collective actions to either resist it or ultimately to stop it. And I think that should be the focus of any coalition. Now, I think I'm not going to put up, unless Conhan, you can put it up for the registrants, the statement we did put up, because I want to focus on this idea that if we are going to stop or even try to stop the rising authoritarianism and the backsliding of democracy and the rule of law globally, domestically and internationally, we have to start thinking about collective actions. So one of the areas which I'm going to talk about, several of the areas where collective action is critical. Let me start firstly with one which we are often ignoring, and that is collective action on the promotion of civic values and civic participation. Because if we don't understand, and the general public does not understand, that civic duties, such as, for example, engaging in public discourse, in holding leaders accountable, essentially allows for authoritarians to rise to power because they rely on complacent populations. So how do we create a coalition or a collective action on that? This is where I think at different levels of education is critical to develop coalitions or collective actions, from high schools to community colleges, and as I shall talk about, even further afield in terms of post-secondary institutions. And essentially, I think it's important for them to start talking to each other and finding out how they can promote collective action. It's something which for a long time I've asked whether or not we should be doing that in Canada. And I'm not sure whether those who are from other countries have discussed whether that's possible in their own countries, in the United States or elsewhere. So that's one collective action which I think is critical. At the post-secondary level, I think there is a great need for collective actions to focus on one particular area, and that is how to combat disinformation and misinformation. Because I think it's very important, a weapon against those who want to use what is now called post-truth and other ways in which to undermine the rule of law. And I think that's one reason why the present US administration is attacking universities, and in particular attacking those universities who have been at the forefront of combating this idea that underlying the rule of law is actually people to accept that reality cannot be turned upside down and turned into post-truth or unreality. So I think there's a great need for collective action. And I'm pleased to see that in the United States, for example, given the attacks on Harvard and others, that some of the Big Ten schools, for example, have started engaging in that sort of collective action. And I think even within Canada, where we don't have those attacks as yet, Canadian universities should maybe asking American universities, how do we support you in that? Because Canadian universities have experience in how to combat disinformation and misinformation. So again, that's another idea which I think is overdue for further expansion. One area which is relevant to lawyers and those who work in government, another category of collective action, is how do we support and protect institutions which have an independent status under their constitutions or under various forms of legislation. And I'm talking about not just independent judiciaries, which obviously does have constitutional status, but I'm also talking about independent institutions such as election commissions, such as those who actually uphold human rights and various ways of attacking those who are undermining the rule of law and human rights. Now, I include in this category law firms. And I don't think we have any example to show how important it is for law firms to engage in collective actions here, to resist those who in power, to use its power to undermine what law firms are supposed to be doing, which is promoting access to justice and allowing for an independent analysis of whether or not the rule of law is broken. And here we see examples where some law firms in the United States have succumbed, but yet again, we've seen some collective action by those who are resisting. And so I think there is a great need for collective action by law firms, by independent institutions who can work with each other, even across jurisdictional bounds. I mean, the Elections Commission should be working with auditors, with other people who can try and find ways to support each other in a time where there is an attack on the rule of law. I think it's very important for us to be more creative in seeing how we can help each other, especially in the legal area where lawyers have that ability to try and figure out how to assist each other in promoting the rule of law. So that's a critical category for collective actions. And I think it's important to start thinking ambitiously, that is perhaps to draw up and link up with other similar institutions in other countries. I am fascinated by the fact that after Trump decided that he was going to put a hold on the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the United States. I'm not sure many people heard about this because I basically was desperately trying to find that information. But on March 20th, the United Kingdom, France, and Switzerland have jointly announced they will form a new international anti-corruption prosecutorial task force to strengthen cross-border collaboration on prosecuting corruption. That's exactly what we should be promoting and trying to find out what other countries can we work with if, for example, there is a vacuum given the present administration in the United States, which is profoundly undermining now the corruption and rule of law guidelines, which we were supposed to be looking at under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Now, maybe other countries should be working together on that. And Canadian lawyers, American lawyers, should be working with each other to see how we can actually support what Switzerland and the United Kingdom is trying to do in this area. So huge possibilities for collective actions in the legal profession. Now, one which is actually perhaps most problematic is how do you develop collective actions in the new technologies, which increasingly are potentially some of the main weapons in which those who are using authoritarian measures and undermining the rule of law are going to be using more and more. We see, for example, what happened with Doge and how the access to the privacy information, which everyone had taken for granted, suddenly disappeared. So how can they be collective actions for those who believe that technology could be a weapon for promoting the rule of law and democracy? Where are the good companies, the good AI companies, the platforms who can work with each other to find ways in which the rule of law and supporting democracy can work together, even if there are very powerful similar technologies and those who control them are acting against them? So these are some of the categories which I think are critical to develop collective actions to essentially resist the growing authoritarianism and the undermining of the rule of law around the world. And what I try to do in the national statement that the International Commission of Jurists has presented, and I hope, Conan, if you have access to this, we can just put it up for the registrants to see what was included in that, because that was the underlying message, that while we understand what's happening in the United States, we still have a lot of abilities to actually assist those in the United States, but also work globally to try and resist and stop the rising authoritarian powers which are trying to undermine the rule of law domestically and internationally. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Errol. I will endeavor to put that up on the screen, but just for everyone to know, it is also available in the notice for this meeting. You can click on it directly there. Excellent comments, Errol. I'll circle back to those after we hear from John. Over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks so much, Kernahan and Errol. I've worked with both of you over the years and admired all of the work that you've done in the field of corporate responsibility and social responsibility, and for the opportunity to let me talk about this area. I have to admit, as I told Karen this morning, that I'm a little rattled because no less than an hour ago, I was told by someone I work with who was a small business that one of her employees, sister-in-law, husband had been picked up by ICE in Brighton, which is just a couple of miles away from where I live, and phone was taken away. Now is being detained somewhere else in an ICE detention facility. And she's launched a GoFundMe campaign to get a lawyer to try to help. And so as I was madly preparing for this and trying to assemble all of this information, I suddenly realized that this is striking very close to home. So in my comments today, I'm not, for those of you who heard me talk before, I'm not going to be as rigorously logical and organized as I sometimes try to be, but rather give a sort of a history lesson about the rule of law and how it can apply outside the legal profession, and talk about what has happened in the United States, which has always been seen as one of the strongest proponents for the rule of law. And I could have entitled my remarks about the Trump administration, everything, everywhere, all at once, in the last 120 days. I try to keep up with what's going on, but it's impossible. And as many of you know, I participated. I was lucky enough to participate with Professor Ruggie in the development of the UN Guiding Principles as a member of his UN mandate team. And I recall that, as I was telling Kernahan earlier, that we didn't spend an awful lot of time focusing on the United States. Rather, our focus was what was happening outside as a result of the globalization of trade and the human rights abuses in which businesses were involved abroad. And that seemed like the natural thing to do. And as a US lawyer, while I was quite aware of some of the failures of US law to protect human rights, I agreed with that approach. But I can't predict how John Ruggie would have responded to the present situation, but he was very much aware of the dangers of the U.S. political system, and had testified to Congress, and so I don't think he would be surprised, but I know he would be fighting exactly what's going on. So I've got a slide here that might help if I can share my, let me just launch this. Okay, if I can put that up. Let's see, are we all seeing this screen? Yeah, here we are. So one of the things I did in preparation for this discussion was to say, okay, there have been many countries in which there have been mass demonstrations, people out on the street in response to various violations of the rule of law and its underpinning of democracy. And they've been in Europe, and they've been in Latin America, notably in Brazil. And people get outraged about attacks on the independence of judges, for example. That hasn't happened in the United States. And so I asked my new friend, ChatGPT, to come up with a sort of a table that would show why these mass protests haven't yet occurred in the United States. And what's fascinating is that there has been a perception, which I think has been reasonably accurate until now, that we have very strong legal protections that we take for granted, checks and balances in which judges are allowed to be independent, legislatures legislate, the executives carry things out. Judges are independent. They're free of threats. They don't have to worry about their personal security. Lawyers are independent, and combined with independent judiciary can provide access to remedy. To the extent that you've had protests in the United States, they've tended to focus on issues, whether it be immigration or universities, Palestine protests, etc. They tend to be very specific. The government response has always been constrained by legal principles, and then there's a federal system with lots of states, and civil society has been very active in the United States. Contrasting that with other countries, well, everything you see in that middle column, you can just take an eraser and just wipe them out, because right now we are in an environment where all of those underpinnings of the rule of law in the United States are under what Jamal Bowie has called a full spectrum attack designed to create an autocratic single leader. I think I can stop sharing this now. So let's just go back to John Ruggie's mandate. Now, I was brought in because I was a corporate lawyer. That's my background, and that's how I approach things. But I quickly learned that when he was creating the guiding principles, John felt that the rule of law was absolutely bedrock for all three pillars of the guiding principles. The state duty to protect. Well, that you can't have states protecting human rights without a strong legal system. The second pillar, the business responsibility to respect human rights, while that is not tied to local law, domestic law may be inadequate to protect human rights, and companies need to be incentivized in order to deploy their resources to protect, to respect human rights. But the rule of law is, of course, bedrock. And then the third pillar, the need for access, effective access to remedy, well, including state remedy, as well as non-judicial grievance mechanisms. That too is an essential part of it. So the law was important. It helped to inspire the concept of human rights due diligence, but human rights due diligence was not necessarily not grounded in legal concepts, and John and I wrote about that, but it permeates the whole atmosphere. Now, one of my interests was to take the guiding principles and say, well, how does it apply to the legal profession? And I work very closely with the International Bar Association, the American Bar Association, not only to get those institutions to endorse the guiding principles, but also to provide some guidance. And we issued two guidance documents, one in 2016 from the IBA. We updated it in 2023, working closely with my good friend Stéphane Brabant from France and a team of international lawyers. And the IBA, in developing those two guidance documents, was absolutely crystal clear of the need for lawyers to be free from harassment by governments based on the 1990 Havana Convention on the basic role of lawyers. And that was absolutely critical to the lawyer's role of independence. But then, and this goes to the point that Errol made regarding, well, a coalition of law firms to support the rule of law. Now, that's an interesting concept to me, and I want to expand on that because I think it's an excellent suggestion. One of the things that the IBA did was to take a leaf from the work done by the Harvard Center on the Legal Profession and say that, well, what are law firms? Are they just professional associations that sort of are autonomous adjutants for a corporation? The answer was no. The concept that the IBA came up with was that lawyers were business organizations, just like any other business, but they had, of course, professional ethical obligations, and that was carried forward in the IBA's 2023 guidance document, in which it emphasized that law firms have a responsibility under the UN guiding principles, and specifically under the concept of human rights due diligence, not to contribute to the harm that their clients may cause to human rights through legal advice and services. Examples are SLAPP suits for strategic litigation against public participation. And then the American Bar Association last year essentially adopted that view. And how does this relate to Errol's points? Well, there are a number of law firms that have banded together to practice in the field of business and human rights. And it's more than just compliance. It's also, I'm sorry, I've got some stuff going on upstairs. Let me just quiet it down. Hey, could you
He's
be
doing that.
quiet
I
up
will.
there, please?
I will just see if I can find the. No, it doesn't look like I can. So I was going to try and find Errol's statement, but as I say, it's available.
Sorry. I'm sorry. So I was just getting onto a key point, which is lawyers have already created an organization, the most prominent of which is the Business and Human Rights Lawyers Association, and that is a logical entity to approach. So I guess I would probably conclude this somewhat rambling discussion by saying that lawyers are central to any coalition building, but I think that the lesson of the guiding principles is that this is more than compliance with a law. You have to engage the key stakeholders outside the legal profession, and that means civil society, that means businesses, as well as those who are engaged in creating and implementing law. So I fully support this effort. I think that the devil is going to be in the details, of course. So with that, I will conclude my remarks and turn it back.
Thanks very much, John. Errol, I don't know whether or not you are in the process of sharing a screen or not. There we go. It's gone back. But at any rate, John, excellent comments, and before that, excellent comments by you, Errol. I just want to kind of throw into this discussion here. The To me, the granddaddy of examples of where disparate organizations and individuals from around the world came together and expressed their support for essentially a rule of law cause, and their condemnation of something that was directly contrary to that was the worldwide condemnation of apartheid in South Africa. And it was a remarkable example of mobilization of private sector, civil society, governments around the world. They came together. They did it in different ways, and rightly so, because each has got their own unique angles on that, energies, etc. No one is suggesting that the groupings of organizations from outside South Africa was kind of the critical reason for why apartheid was toppled in South Africa, but it was part of the story. And really, I think that that's what we're talking about here is a very, very diverse grouping of organizations. I love to see the kind of the talk about, well, can the lawyers get together? Can the law firms get together? Can the universities get together? I would go one step further just on that front. Why not even what about just law professors? What about just law professors in Canada, law professors in France, law professors in the UK, and so on and so forth? Why can't they? And then why can't their entire universities come together as domestic national groups to say, we condemn what's going on? Because after all, what's happening there in the United States could happen to them. And unfortunately, we do see, given the influence that the United States has, that there is this domino effect potential, which is very, very real, very, very real. We're seeing companies outside the United States dropping their handling of this issue and that issue, even though there's no law in their jurisdiction that requires them to do that. They'll just do it because of what's going on in the United States. So what I'm saying is, I think that these obvious subgroups like law firms or lawyers and so on, they need to get together, but they need to reach across the aisle and say, even though we differ in a lot of ways, we have this in common with you, universities. And the universities should say, we have this in common with you, civil society organizations, and we have this in common with you, and so on and so forth, in a chain of that degree of commonality. And I think that that creates a cohesive backdrop to what then any individual organization does, or if any individual organization or individual is attacked, these are the people that are watching. These are the organizations that are watching, and these are the organizations that are capable of coming together to condemn and perhaps do something more. As for what is the more, I'm going to leave that open-ended for now, but there's tremendous potential for much more than just condemnation. But condemnation is a first step, a little bit like what they always say about being an alcoholic. The first step is realizing you're an alcoholic and admitting it. So you've got to start there before you can move on to now what are you going to do about it? Anyway, I want to pass things back to Errol and John for immediate follow-up thoughts that they might have on the basis of anything that's been said so far.
Thank you very much. Just following up from my suggestions for focusing on collective actions and how do you do this? I agree with you and with John and you, Conan, in terms of going beyond the law, lawyers. But I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that institutions only do stuff which is of their core interest. So that's why I'm thinking about focusing on, let's take, for example, some the school boards or community colleges. They understand that they have to, at some stage, promote these fundamental values of the rule of law, democracy, etc. But they don't seem to talk to each other. So maybe one way of doing that is to work through the organizations that these various institutions have and say, guys, what about us having a dialogue with your members on these issues? Likewise, universities. I mean, there are associations of universities, and maybe it's time that they started talking about how they can work together, especially in the area of disinformation and misinformation, because it is core to what they actually are all about, which is critical thinking, which is at the basis of why you have large percentages of the population in America who still thinks, for example, that Obama was a Muslim and was not able to be the United States. So I mean, it's that level of fighting the basis on which the institutions are all about, which is critical thinking, which will get them to work together. Likewise with lawyers. I mean, I'm fascinated by the fact that the law firms who took on Trump, because they began to realize that if you succumb to a bully, you know what's going to happen next. The bully's going to come back and ask for more, as he is doing. So there's deep, deep interest on the part of the best law firms and hopefully those in the coalition. And John, I don't know how many of them but ask them. Are they interested in developing on a principle-based basis to develop their coalition, which can then draw in more members and maybe international members from Canada, from Europe, to start talking about how we as a collective community do the same. Likewise with judges. I mean, judges love to talk to other judges around the world. Well, maybe they should be, regional and international coalitions of judges working with each other to promote the rule of law on this basis. So my suggestion is focus on what the core interests of each of these institutions are and try and encourage them to work together, and we'll be there to basically help them and see how we can help them develop that structure. So that's my very practical approach to how you go forward on this.
Thanks, Errol. I agree with that. My comment, which is based on what I led this with, is that we need to sell this at retail. This is ideas are great, but when people begin to realize that the rule of law affects them personally, affects people they work with, affects friends, and affects neighbors, as we've been seeing it all over Massachusetts and in neighborhoods close by, at Harvard University, across the river from where I live and where I went to school. I think that personal retail connection is the thing that allows you to start seeing things in a systemic way, and that has to be the basis for going forward in selling the rule of law across multiple sectors.
John and Errol, I want to thank you both for pushing this one step further. And there's going to be a small group which consists of the three of us here and also someone that those of you who've patched in for previous Zoom sessions will know about, Bennett Freeman, who's done a lot of work to develop coalitions dealing with very similar issues. The four of us are going to be an initial group to take a stab at this draft statement and maybe to work on some next steps. There's definitely going to be future Zoom sessions with different individuals coming from different backgrounds and angles to essentially build concentric circles of commonality. As has been said here, find what is the core issue that matters to you, connect that core issue to the rule of law, recognize the significant connection between those two, and then do what you can to move that forward. Don't sit back. Don't sit back. This is a time when all of us have got to not sit back. And the only way we can effectively address this, in my opinion, is by not sitting back. So again, thank you so much, John and Errol, for your comments here today and for agreeing to push the ball a little bit further down the road here. And everybody, thank you so much for joining. Stay tuned. And as I said, there's this website called resilientgovernance.org. no space between that, resilientgovernance.org. If you click on that website and click on publications, that will take you to the preliminary research that we've done here at Toronto Metropolitan University. We need to build on that. It's evolving kind of database. And please feel free to email me, or for that matter, I'm sure John and Errol, and let's work together. There's a Joni Mitchell song. Joni Mitchell, one of those famous Canadians, along with, for example, Leonard Cohen, who once said, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone?" Let's not do that, shall we?